Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, where you join me on Muluna, and as you can see here, we've finally got to the point where we have a nice steady supply of white science. The space science pack's coming in, and that's an excellent timing. We've got some being launched off to a nearby spaceship to be shipped out over to Norvis to be actually scienced with. And so, yes, we have this steady trickle coming through, as you can see. However, it's taken quite a lot of work to get to this point. So, let's have a look at what's been going on. It all starts, of course, with the resource gathering, and on this planet that means, well, we've got this. We have this starter patch here, which has a load of stone and metallic and oxide and carbonic chunks in it, and well, we're churning through those at a decent rate. We have several 100,000 of each of them left, so we've got they're decently sized patches. But the problem is, because they're so close together, all the mining drills that Mike has put in are pulling up multiple resources. So if we look at this one here, for example, you can see that's going to pull up 12,000 oxide and 2,600 metallic, and so on. Many of them are pulling up more than one. So we ended up with all of these mixed belts running along here, and they were then feeding down a single belt and trying to then supply all of the machines down here to crush them down to provide the actual resources we need. And that was causing a lot of difficulties. So we've gone in and we've done a bit of splitting out. So we're pulling out the oxide chunks here, as you can see, and those being shipped out separately. The idea being that we're trying to keep as much of the system flowing as we can in order to keep a good, healthy supply of all the different resources available. In the longer term, we're probably going to go further away, and in fact we already did that with carbonic, because at one point we're getting through enormous quantities of carbon, and the belts coming out of this patch just couldn't keep up. So I went out and did some exploring. As you can see, we've now seen quite a lot extra area here. It turns out the cars can drive around on the moon, even when they're using carbon or coal as fuel and there's no oxygen available. Let's sort of ignore that for now and just assume it worked somehow. But anyway, yes, I was able to drive out, and I thought my first plan was to explore what do we consider to be our starter area, which is this sort of circle here, but we'd seen it sort of spread out a bit more. There's a bit more room further down, so I drove down here, and then I found that you could go over this way as well before you start to hit all the cliff faces. There are a lot of cliffs on this planet, and these are the bits we've been describing as being a bit like fingerprints, because you've got all these stripes going across like this. But I did manage to find a way through down here, so I carried on over this way, and there's quite a big area over here as well. So it looks like the direction we decided to grow the butt in right at the start was pretty much the only direction we couldn't expand in. If we'd done a bit more exploration first, we could have started our bus here and gone straight down here, and would have had loads of space to build. But to be fair to Mike, we didn't know that at the time. However, it's something that perhaps is worth exploring a little bit further and considering where cliff faces are and so on before we start trying to put buses in. So maybe we'll remember that on a future planet, and maybe we'll completely forget. Who knows? This does mean though that my vague idea that perhaps Muluna was designed to be difficult to expand on until you get cliff explosives, at which point you can then expand much more powerfully, is not quite true, because we've managed to expand here without too much difficulty. As you can see, in this particular case, we found there's a carbonic patch up here, and there was another one somewhere off to the south, I think. There's another one over here. This one would be lovely if we had trains, but we don't have them on this planet yet set up, so it was ended up just using a mark belt going from the patch up here and winding its way through between the cliffs and under them occasionally, and that allowed me to get it down here. And we've got a solid red belt of the carbonic chunks coming in and feeding the crushers down here, which meant we have plenty of carbon coming out. But that's now working. Another thing I found quite interesting is that when a resource patch is placed, it will remove any cliffs that are underneath it. So you can see with this oxide chunk patch here, there's a cliff coming in across it like this, but where the patch itself has landed, well, there's no cliff going through there. And that means you've got occasional places where you can get through the cliff walls, and it makes it a bit easier to mine them out if you need to. And so yes, up here with this carbonic patch, I was able to slap down a perfectly standard mine, at least until I ran out of drills. And so that's now, and that's running quite happily, and as I said, giving us as much carbon as we could possibly need. As another external separate mine, I've put in a uranium mine up here, which is chugging through happily, producing the uranium as we need it. We have now invented Covarex processing, so we've got these two centrifuges here waiting to do a Covarex run whenever they finally get enough of the bright uranium. We've not had very much of that come out yet. There's one in there and none in there. We did seed it a little bit with uranium from Norvis, so we've got down here, we've got this assembly machine was given lots and lots of the bright, which it has churned through. But that was enough for it to create a decent number of uranium fuel cells, which have been passed down into the nuclear power plant down here that Tristan produced. And so this is enough to keep the power plant running, meaning we've got all the power we could possibly use now, and we don't have to rely on solar for everything, because we were really struggling with solar. If we go back far enough, You can't really see it because it's disappeared into the noise way back in the distant past. But for quite a long time we were producing solar, which is the blue lines, and then using the accumulators overnight, and they weren't keeping up. And we got to the point where the solar panels weren't really keeping up either. And so now we've just gone full on nuclear. Okay, we've got some solar. Solar is being produced during the day, as you can see here. Quite long day-night cycles on Muluna. So we've got, yes, the solar is being produced during the day, so we're using that. But then the power from the nuclear plant ramps up overnight to compensate. And during the day, we are still using quite a lot of power from the nuclear plant as well. So we definitely need that. Tristan has set it up to be controlled based on the temperature of the reactors, and that's a really nice feature that I very much appreciate in Factorio 2.0. So over here we can read the temperature out of the reactor, and then each one of these inserters will insert when the temperature gets below 600 degrees. So at the moment it's 4.6 thousand degrees. When it drops below 600, it'll run and it'll insert another fuel cell. And he's got some additional settings up here that are doing a bit of monitoring. So here he's watching for how much steam there is in the tanks and dividing that by 100 and reckoning that that is a suitable approximation for temperature. So the idea being that he's got these tanks down here that are storing excess steam because we're not using power fast enough to use the output of these reactors. So if you wait for them to get down to 600, then puts in the fuel cells, they'll get up to their maximum temperature before the fuel cells are finished burning. So that's a waste of fuel, and we don't have a huge amount of it available here. So instead, he's got the steam tanks in here to allow a bit of sort of overspill, to allow a bit more steam to be created and stored in the tanks temporarily. And then we can work our way through that steam. When that gets down to 0, we'll stop adding to the temperature from there. And also, he's monitoring how many fuel cells there are in the reactors and multiplying that by 200. So if there's a couple of fuel cells in these reactors still, then they probably won't kick in and and run again. It's a slightly different way from the way I did it in my design. I think I just said don't run when there is already a fuel cell in the reactor. But you know, this will work too, so that should be fine. Oh, actually, he's only reading from one reactor, so I guess the reactors can only drop down to 500 before the heat exchangers will stop working. And so adding 200 on means that it can't be below 500, so that would nudge it up to 700. So yes, it will never kick in while there's a fuel cell in there. But I did the read fuel and then I used a decider combinator saying if there's any steam, or if the temperature is over 600, or if there are any fuel cells, don't feed one in. It's roughly the same sort of system, just done slightly differently by different people because we all think about these things in different ways. So yeah, this will be absolutely fine. It's much nicer than the old system we had to use in 1.1, where you connect one of these inserters to the other one, and you say when this one unloads, this one has to load, and then you activate both of them when there's less than a certain amount of steam, which is, yeah, it's not great, but it can be made to work. But the current system, now that you can read the temperature of the reactors, is much better. So I'm very glad that feature was added. That was a little bit of a distraction and has taken me away from the resource gathering I was talking about. So yes, we have all of those coming in. I suspect if we expand much further, we'll go off and tap some separate oxide and metallic patches and bring those in and feed them in as a lower priority, which is what we're doing here with the carbonics, I think. I can't see where they're actually being merged, but oh yes, here we go. Any carbonics that come out here are being put onto this belt. They're not actually being prioritised, but there's enough throughput that doesn't seem to be a problem. All of the stuff that's coming out of the mines over here is getting used up. You can see a little bit of is built up here, but as we let the system run, it'll trickle through and it'll get used up. So you can see, yes, you can see we are using it up faster than we're digging it up over here. So that does seem to be okay. If this does become a problem, we can always put priorities on these splitters like that to make sure we use up what's coming from the mines first, and then use what's coming from the big mine up north. But it's working fine as it is. So yes, we're making all these resources. What are we doing with them? Well, the crushers over here, the metallics, they produce mostly iron and a little bit of stone, so that's lovely. The iron is getting used up mostly for making infrastructure stuff originally. The stone, I am not sure. Where does the stone go? The stone is going up here and passed along here, and it's a belt to nowhere. Okay, so we're just passing stone in and I guess, oh, okay, it's being turned into landfill at the moment. But once we have enough landfill, we'll then dribble it through here over this way, where it can then be turned into sand, which can be used for making glass and so on and so on. But also, we're getting quite a lot of sand out of the ice processing. In fact, we're getting too much sand out of the ice processing. This belt has jammed up along here again. I thought we'd sorted that problem out, but apparently not. We are balancing it over here, and then the sand is being brought up to here to be made into glass, and then that's being taken off for science production, but it's not really enough at the moment, unfortunately, so that's a little bit awkward. But Hopefully it won't jam up too much. Every so often we'll go in here, we'll put a little bit of sand out to try and even the sides up. But yeah, this has been a recurring problem over here. Then the carbonic is being crushed down into carbon and coal, both of which are being sent off to be used as fuel elsewhere. So that's working fine. The carbonic is absolutely fine. There's no jam, no worries, no jams happening with that. The other two, though, eventually we're going to have made enough landfill and we're going to have made enough glass, and there might be some problems here which we're going to have to keep an eye on. But hopefully it won't jam up. We'll just have to watch it carefully and hope for the best. Then next up over here we are crushing the what's the ore called? We're crushing the anorthite down into alumina, and the alumina is being taken away to be cooked into aluminium up here somewhere. This one up here turned into aluminium, and also being taken over here to be turned into crushed alumina, which in the future we expect to be able to cook into aluminium, but we don't have the technology for that yet. But also we do need that elsewhere. So this area isn't wasted. It's just we don't need that right now. So producing all of that is going quite well. We have a steady trickle of iron coming out here, which is okay, I suppose. The steel is caught up. The aluminium is running along okay. I'd say we are using it almost as fast as we're making it, but it's pretty close. It's sort of okay. And glass is absolutely fine. And then we've got up here, we've got a robo-maul set up. So this is something I don't normally do myself because I like to have everything belt fed because I'm a belt purist, should we say. But a bot-based maul has been quite convenient because we're at one point we're very, very short of belts. So it would have been quite a lot more difficult to build up a belt-based maul. So this is fairly straightforward. All of these are a machine with a red chest and a blue chest. The blue chest brings in the stuff for whatever the machine needs, and then the machine unloads into the red chest, and the things are then taken away from there. So, for example, over here we are making yellow inserters, so that means we're bringing in burner inserters and green circuits and gears and iron plates. And then we're outputting the yellow inserters, which can then be taken over to here and here in order to be made into fast inserters and long inserters. And the fast inserters can be brought over here to be made into bulk inserters, and all of those inserter types can then be taken away to be used wherever they're needed in the factory. I didn't actually know we had bulk inserters. There are a few places I wish I'd been using those now. But basically the system does work. If you don't have enough bots, it can get a little bit overwhelmed at times, and sometimes you find that maybe you're not making gears fast enough, or you're not making basic inserters fast enough, or something like that. But at which point you can then just have more machines making those. So it's not a difficult system to set up. A bit of balancing can be tricky, and also at the moment we've got the logistics bots are quite busy because every so often they have to fly all the way over to here to gather some trees and then fly them back down here to put them in a greenhouse to allow us to do the tree growing. But I'll get back to that in a little bit more detail in a moment, because that was probably the next thing I want to talk about. Just up here, Tristan put in a little area to cook some more iron because we didn't have enough furnaces, and this area was kind of full. We couldn't extend any further this way because of the fingerprints, and we couldn't go up or down because we've already used all that space up. Possibly we could have gone up here, but that would have blocked off this area for when we inevitably realise we need more aluminium or more steel. So that's squeezed in there nicely. The next thing, oh boy, this was the big thing. Making the wood was making the wood fast enough causes all kinds of trouble. This all comes down to us playing with the Lignumis mod as well. So looking at the space map, you can see, yes, we also have the moon of Lignumis. And Lignumis adds in a few interesting features, including top of the list, you get wooden transport belts as well. And not only do you get wooden belts as a starter thing, it's a telescopic recipe, so you need the wooden belts to make the yellow belts, and then you need the yellow belts to make the red belts, and so on and so on. So in order to make any belts at all, you need to start off with you don't need them for these ones, but anyway, to make any of the normal belt tiers, you need to start off with wooden belts first. So we needed a lot of wood to make all of the belts we required on this planet. Building a bus system the way we're doing it requires a lot of belts, so that was churning through an enormous quantity of wood. But as if that wasn't enough, then we discovered, once we got onto the later stages, well, we're going to need a certain amount of petroleum gas, but that's made from wood as well. So we're bringing in the crushed wood here, turning it into cellulose with sulfuric acid, then passing that over here to be made into petroleum gas, which we can then make into sulfur, which we can then make into sulfuric acid. I talked about this process in the previous Muluna video because we managed to get it all up and running on a very, very small scale, and then this is the sort of the increased scale version of it. So the process is quite nice. When you loop through this, as long as you've got a steady input of wood, you get about 7 times as much sulfur out for each time it runs through. So it's a nicely expanding recipe. So it's not a problem in that we had problems with the sulfur, except in order to get more sulfur we needed more wood, and we also needed to tap off quite a lot of the petroleum gas in order to do other things with it, like making plastic, which we'll get to in a moment. And we also need the sulfuric acid for mining, of course. So I've now put in a pump here that will only pump it out down here if there's more than a certain amount in there. So if there's more than 10k, then we'll pump it out. And at the moment, we're absolutely fine. We're virtually full on sulfuric acid, so we don't have a problem there. But this is there as a safety mechanism to make sure that if we do have a crisis, we don't get to a point where we can't bootstrap the system again. Now, technically we could always bootstrap it, because if we go off and mine up one of the random lunar rocks that are on this planet, and that I can't see any of at the moment because we've mined them all up while we're trying to expand. Yeah, one of these guys. There's a bit of sulfur in there, so we would be able to use that to bootstrap the system again. But ideally, we'd want to not get into that position in the first place. So yes, that's okay there. And similarly over here, the petroleum gas is not used at the other end of here unless there's more than a certain amount of it available in the system. So here you can see this petroleum gas pipe is at 60% full, so we won't be taking it away to make plastic out of it unless we've got enough sitting in the system that we can make the sulfur to make the sulfuric acid and so on. So I've been quite careful about making sure that we don't have any problems with that. That then gets passed all the way down here, where we can then make plastic in order to make things further on. But I was talking about the wood at the moment. So yes, we need quite a lot of wood flowing through for this. And so I've expanded, and we've got a lot of machines here crushing the wood and then turning it into cellulose, which can then be turned into petroleum gas. But that's meant more and more of these machines making the wood as well. Now, okay, right now we seem to actually have enough of it. And there's a lot of machines here that don't seem to be unloading onto the far side of the belt. Maybe I should look at that. So it feels like we finally got to a point where this is a solved problem. We have enough of the resources going on at the moment, so I guess that means we just need to expand somewhere else, find out where the problem is. But this took a lot of work to get to this point, because making wood is non-trivial. The actual basic recipes aren't too complex. Just producing wood is relatively straightforward. You bring in some seeds, some carbon dioxide and some water, basically how plants work, and that produces 40 wood and 10,000 oxygen. Great. Okay, so that's going to produce us some wood. That's a good starting point. But the downside of this recipe is this 300-second crafting time in here. Yes, this recipe genuinely takes 5 minutes to run once and produce 40 wood. And that's not a great deal of wood. And so, but that can be done in a chemical plant, and then that'll get you, and this is what we use to get us started, to get our first initial few bits of wood when we're doing a bit of a proof of concept on the design initially. The next step is to start doing it in a sealed greenhouse, and the sealed greenhouse works at 10 times the speed of the chemical plant, so it brings it down from 5 minutes per craft down to half a minute, and that's a massive improvement. That makes things reasonable and practical to do. The problem, however, is that producing one of these sealed greenhouses wood growing requires some landfill, which isn't a problem because we've got stone. It requires a sealed greenhouse, which is some fairly basic stuff. This again is not a problem. But it also requires 100 trees. That is a bit of a problem. Making the trees is fairly similar to making the wood. It's an alternative recipe. Again, takes in tree seeds, carbon dioxide and water and a lot of time. And this one produces the trees and the oxygen. So it's basically the same process, except that you're not inherently cutting up the trees before you ship them out of the buildings. It potentially would be interesting if you always just produced trees and then there was an extra step for chopping them up in a lumber mill or something into wood. But we don't have to worry about that. However, we do have to make 100 of these trees in order to make one of the greenhouses. So you can see there's a little bit of a sort of a chicken and an egg problem here. You need the trees to get the greenhouses, but you need the greenhouses to get the trees at any sort of decent speed. So what we ended up having to do was use several chemical plants running at the speed of 1 in order to produce our first 100 trees. Once we got the first 100 trees made, then it was fairly trivial to switch over to making a wood-growing greenhouse and have that make the next set of trees. However, we did need to still have some wood coming through in order to make the seeds. So actually, once we got 2 of these greenhouses up and running, that was the first 2 down here, 1 making wood and 1 making trees. Then we were starting to produce the wood and the trees at a decent rate, and we were able to then snowball fairly quickly and effectively and produce the huge number of greenhouses you can see out here. Getting the first 2 together was very time consuming and quite hard, especially as people kept insisting on taking some of the wood away in order to make belts and things. But we did eventually get there. Yeah, the greenhouses, eventually you get a decent number of them up and running and everything seems great. And then suddenly you find it's all broken. And there are a couple of possible reasons for this. And this problem came from, well, it turns out to grow these trees also requires an enormous amount of water. So you can see here, it takes 500 water to grow. Okay, you get 40 wood out from it, but still 500 is quite a lot of water. And so all that water comes from melting ice. So we bring in ice on the belts here, and oh dear, we seem to have run out of it again. That's going to be a bit of a problem. We're going to have to go and have a look at that. But this is a nice example of why this is a problem. But the ice will come in here, it will be melted in these chemical plants, it will make water, and then that will go into all of these greenhouses in order to produce the wood. So that was kind of okay for a while. Then we discovered the amount of sand that gets produced in making enough ice to produce that many trees is more sand than we were using up in the rest of the factory. And so that caused the problem that you can see right here, where we have so much sand that the ice isn't getting fed through anymore. This is a difficult one to solve, unfortunately, because, well, we only have a small sink for the sand. The sand can be turned into glass, and that's about all we're doing with it on this planet. So we have a bit of a problem there. And so that meant that the whole system just ground to a halt, as it has done now. At the time, we were able to solve it, because as well as this recipe, where you bring in 500 water and 10k and 10 to produce your 40 wood, there is the water-saving recipe over here, where you grow it a bit more slowly. It takes 600 seconds instead of 300, so it takes twice as long. But remember, the machine runs at 10 times speed, so it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But it takes the same amount of other inputs, but only half the amount of water to produce the same amount of wood. So we went, okay, fine, we'll switch everything over to using that recipe instead. And that meant I had to double the number of greenhouses. Recipe runs at half the speed, you need twice as many greenhouses. Fine, okay, we can do that. I've put in twice as many greenhouses now, that's why there's quite so many of them. And that was okay for quite a while, but it seems to have reared its ugly head again, and we've got the sand problem once more. And so, well, we're going to have a look into that and see what we can do. Now, I sort of hope that we're seeing that because we are still expanding infrastructure to some extent. So maybe we're still using more water in growing the trees over here. And once we start just doing science, maybe things will be a little bit better. I don't know. But in the short term, well, I can come over here and I could pick up a load of sand off this belt, I suppose, like this. Just gather all of this up, and that'll allow the ice to start flowing again. So as you can see, the ice is now flowing once again because there's some gaps on the sand belt. There's a lot of sand being produced at this point. I think that maybe some of it is backed up a little bit and it'll get slightly cleaner once this is sort of filtered out. But there is a lot of sand that we need to get rid of. So yes, that's just filling the sand belt back up again. But we do at least now have a nice solid belt of ice coming through. So that is better. Eventually that'll make its way all the way up here. It'll start to flow in here and up into the ice melting area, where we'll grab loads and loads of it off the belt with all of these machines along here, all these chemical plants, and that can chuck it into this tank. And that means now these greenhouses are going to be able to kick back in. They'll start working. I don't know how much of a problem it's become so far, but yeah, you can see by the way this tank is being kept empty. We haven't got as much water as we would like to have, so the ice has definitely fallen behind quite a long way. Now, I did say that was one of the two problems that we had that kept cropping up. So if we take another quick look at this recipe, well, you can see that we have tree seeds, carbon dioxide and water in order to make these, in order to run these recipes. And the water is coming in now. The tree seeds aren't too bad. That's just peel off some of the wood and then process it in assembly machines, and you can produce seeds. So we've had to extend the number of machines a few times, fine, but that's easily done. That's not a problem at all. And it just takes some of the wood, a relatively small percentage of it. That's okay. It's the carbon dioxide that has also been a bit of an issue. Because carbon dioxide is largely, well, a little bit of it is made by the alternative melting recipe here. So we can turn ice and oxygen into water and carbon dioxide, but we've not really been doing that very much. What we've been generally doing is just the straight up burning the carbon in an oxygen atmosphere in order to make carbon dioxide, fine. And that will work off either the carbon or the coal. So we've got both of those belts are coming up here, and they're both being fed in, as you can see, the carbon belt and the coal belt, both being fed up here. And so this belt up here is technically, actually it's a mix of carbon, coal and solid fuel. All of those can go in here. They can be turned into carbon dioxide. That's great. That works fine. Except that these machines couldn't keep up. Partly because I couldn't squeeze quite enough in here, so we put in some more over here. But then it turned out that the belt of carbon we had coming up was just straight up not enough. Fortunately, that was a relatively simple fix. We didn't have enough carbon, so we added in a second belt. Now that sounds simple to say, but it did mean quite a lot of messing around down here in the carbon crushing area. So we've now got, instead of the filtering system we were using before, we made a couple of big changes here. One was that we now have two outputs, but the other big change we made was we started filtering out things like the uncrushed carbonic chunks and the coal, before we actually ship out these full belts of carbon. Because as it was before, there tended to be, when it was running flat out, we'd end up with quite a lot of gaps on these belts, because the belt would have carbon and carbonic chunks and coal on it, and so when you strip out the coal and the carbonic chunks, you no longer have a full belt. So we only had about 80-85% of a belt flowing up there, which wasn't enough. So there was, but fortunately, it was relatively easy to then just start pulling out the bits and pieces that we want to recycle down here, and then pulling out the bits that we want to pass up on a different belt up here, and then merging all of the belts together to get us enough throughput to get 2 solid belts of carbon running up. So it was a fiddly job. It wasn't difficult as such, but getting all of the infrastructure into the right places and just keeping everything flowing took a little bit of faffery. But as you can see, we've now got a plentiful supply coming in here. We have a decent quantity of carbon dioxide. He says, looking at this tank over here, there's 100. There's not very much in here. I was going to say, but it hasn't gone to 0. It has just gone to 0. We have had a shortage of oxygen. That's interesting. So, yeah, so in theory, we should carry on burning the carbon in order to produce the carbon dioxide, in order to keep all of these running. And generally, that does work. When these finish, as well as dumping out a load of wood, they will also dump out a load of oxygen, which goes into all of these tanks over here to give us plenty of headroom. Because we did once or twice run into a problem where the system jammed up because everything was full of oxygen. But at the moment, this is absolutely fine. Down here, this is where the original oxygen production happened. We've got a couple of machines that are taking in water, electrolyzing it to produce oxygen and hydrogen. So the oxygen goes into the tank here whenever we're a bit short of it, but we're very rarely short of it. That said, we are now actually short of it, so hopefully these machines will kick in. They're not kicking in. Oh, because there's no water at the moment because we've run out of ice again. Right, okay, it's that problem has circled back to the first problem again, where we've run out of ice, so presumably the belt is clogged up once again with sand, and so we're not getting any ice through. So I can clear up, if I clear up all of this yet again, then yeah, the ice will start flowing again. But you can see the sort of problem we're having here. Because our demand for ice is significantly higher than our demand for sand, it is problematic. And so we get on to the, well, what can we do with all this sand? So I guess using concrete mix, well, technically we do have a bit of a use for that in that we've needed it for making a couple of rocket silos, but we've made those now, so that's not going to drain any more of it. We need it for glass. Okay, we're making glass. We don't have a great deal of need for that. And then all of these other ones, that's Meraxis, that's crushing industry, but that's lava, so we're not doing that one. That's molten iron. We're not using that at the moment. That's molten glass. We don't have calcite. We don't have holmium. We don't have molten iron. We don't. So there's. Oh, if we could get that going, but that's Moshin. We haven't gone there yet, so we don't have that tech. If we did, that'd be really useful on this planet because we have all those inputs. It'd be really good to be able to make carbon and petroleum gas on this, from those. We don't have that one. We don't have that one. So yeah, you see the problem here. We have all of these possible ways of making sand. We have a massive quantity of it as a byproduct, but we just don't have it any ways to use it realistically at the moment. So we're getting far more of it in than we need, and it's causing problems. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do about it, apart from go in and clean it out every so often and then hope that the problem goes away. And that takes us all the way along to here, where we are also using the wood in order to make all of the loads of belts. That is, it was another major drain on the wood production for a while. At the moment, we don't care too much about it because the volume of wood we're producing means that that's not an enormous drain on it, I don't think, even though we have been trying to make enormous numbers of belts to upgrade everything to red, which has now finished actually. So that's good. We can stop using wood for infrastructure. So maybe we'll start using slightly less ice. I somehow doubt it though. But I think this is far along enough. I've talked about all of the problems we've been having with the wood. I think next time I shall talk about making circuits and making science and stuff like that. I think this is a good point to draw the line under this episode. So I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. Please come back for the next stream on Monday when we'll be carrying on, maybe going on to a new planet. Who knows? We probably won't be on Muluna anymore because by the time this video comes out, we'll probably have left. Although it's probably going to require some tinkering. So if you want to know more about what we got up to here, just ask in the stream. There'll be another stream on Wednesday when I should be playing Foundry, which is sort of Factorio in a Minecraft world, and I'm quite enjoying that. It's going very well. And then on Thursdays and Fridays, these videos are coming out. So please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel so you don't miss out on anything. Keep an eye on Twitch and YouTube for any future streams. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.